My sister stole our parents' house through manipulation, winning it back in court, forced a sale that exposed the truth and destroyed our family forever. The piece of paper in my hand felt heavier than it had any right to be. It was just a single sheet of cardstock embossed with a court seal, the ink still smelling faintly of a government printer. But as I stood on the cracked pavement in front of my childhood home, it felt like it weighed 35 years. My entire life condensed into a few paragraphs of dense legal jargon. The final verdict: I had won. But standing there staring at the familiar faded blue siding and the slightly crooked porch swing, I felt anything but victorious. This wasn't a trophy. It was an epitaph. It was the legal confirmation of a family that had ceased to exist. I'm Silas Cooper. I'm 35 years old. For the last 6 months, I've been locked in a legal battle against my own sister for the soul of this house. Not for the wood and the plaster and the property value, but for what it was supposed to represent. My parents, David and Mary Cooper, bought this place 30 years ago. It was the only home they ever owned, the only home I ever knew. They poured their lives into these walls. My father built the bookshelves in the living room with his own 2 hands. My mother planted every single rose bush that lined the walkway, each one a different color. They had a simple, fair plan for what would happen when they were gone. 5 years ago, they sat down together, perfectly healthy and full of life, and drafted a will. It was notarized, clear and simple. Everything they owned, including this house, was to be split right down the middle. 50% for me, 50% for my sister Eleanor. But families, I've learned, are a lot more fragile than the houses they live in. 2 years ago, we lost our dad after a long, hard fight with an illness that took him from us piece by piece. His passing left a hole in our family that felt like a crater. For my mom, it was like the light in her own life had been dimmed. Her health, which had been so robust, began to decline at a speed that terrified me. That's when my sister Eleanor moved in. She was 38, 3 years older than me, and she presented herself as the dutiful daughter, the designated caregiver. She would look after Mom full-time, she said. She would handle everything. I was grateful. I had my own life, my own job, and the thought of my mom being cared for in her own home was a profound relief. But every time I visited, something felt off. There was a tension in the air you could taste. Mom seemed more withdrawn, quieter. Eleanor was always there, a constant shadow, answering questions directed at my mother, managing her schedule, her calls, her entire life with an iron grip. She called it care. It started to feel like control. 18 months ago, plagued by a gnawing suspicion I couldn't shake, I installed a hidden camera system in the main living areas of the house. A simple nanny cam, the kind new parents use. I told myself it was for peace of mind, to make sure Mom was safe when I wasn't there. Deep down, I think I knew I was looking for proof that the bad feeling in my gut was real. I found it. A year ago, Eleanor did the unthinkable. She got our mother, a grieving widow in failing health, to sign a new will. A document that completely erased my father's wishes, my mother's long-held intentions, and my entire existence as their son. This new will left everything, the house, the savings, 30 years of our parents' life, and work 100% to Eleanor. 8 months ago, we lost our mom. At the reading of the will, a month later, the bomb dropped. Eleanor, with a look of solemn self-righteousness, presented the new document. She claimed it was our mother's final wish, a reward for her sacrificial care. She said she had earned it. The word hung in the air, ugly and sharp. Earned it, as if our mother's love and legacy were items on a ledger, a debt to be paid. That's when the fight began. The next 6 months were a blur of lawyers' depositions and sleepless nights. I filed a lawsuit to have that second will thrown out, citing undue influence and elder abuse. My primary evidence was the footage from that little camera, hours of it archived and time-stamped, showing the relentless daily campaign of emotional manipulation. The subtle threats, the isolation, the constant narrative that I was a bad son who had abandoned her, that only Eleanor truly cared. It was all there in grainy color. Today, it was finally over. The court saw the truth. They invalidated the second will, calling it a product of coercion. The estate, the judge declared, would revert to the original untainted will from 5 years ago. 50-50, just like Mom and Dad had always wanted. I looked from the paper back to the house. The paint on the porch steps was peeling in the exact same spot it had been for a decade. The third window from the left on the second floor was my old bedroom. I could almost see the ghosts of my parents waving from the front door. This victory was for them. It was to honor their memory, to protect their legacy from the lie Eleanor had tried to build. It was never about the money. But the legal victory had created a new impossible reality. My sister was still inside that house. She hadn't left. For the past 2 years, it had been her fortress, her domain. And now, according to the law, we were co-owners. The official term my lawyer used was tenancy in common. It's a fancy way of saying we were both stuck. I owned half the house and she owned half the house. Neither of us could sell it, rent it, or so much as repaint the front door without the other's consent. A perfect legal stalemate. Imagine a car with 2 steering wheels and 2 sets of brakes with 2 drivers who want to go in opposite directions. That was our house now, a monument to a broken family held together by mutual ownership and mutual resentment. I took a deep breath, the cold January air stinging my lungs. Winning in court wasn't the end. It was just the beginning of a different kind of fight. It was one thing to have a piece of paper that said I owned half of this house. It was another thing entirely to walk through that front door and face the person who had tried to steal it all. The person who was still living inside my inheritance, inside my memories. My sister. My hand closed around the old brass key in my pocket. It felt cold, just like the verdict in my other hand. I had to go in. I had to face her. We had to figure out what came next, how to untangle this mess, and finally let our parents rest in peace. I started up the walkway, each step on the familiar concrete slabs, feeling like a step into a war zone. I knew this wouldn't be easy, but I had no idea just how ugly it was about to get. The key slid into the lock with a familiar grating sound, a noise I'd heard 1,000 times coming home from school, from college, from work. But this time it felt different. It felt like forcing a key into a lock that no longer recognized it. The brass was cold against my palm, a stark contrast to the court order in my jacket pocket, which felt like it was burning a hole through the fabric. I turned the key, pushed the heavy oak door inward, and stepped across the threshold. The smell hit me first. It was the same, yet not. The faint, comforting scent of our mother's potpourri and old books was gone. In its place was something else, something sterile and sharp, like industrial-strength air freshener, trying to mask the scent of stale air and resentment. The house was quiet, but it wasn't a peaceful quiet. It was the heavy, suffocating silence of a place where too many things had been left unsaid. The runner in the hallway was gone. The faded Persian rug that had been there for 30 years, the one I'd tripped over as a kid, and that Dad had always threatened to throw out but never did, had been replaced by a cheap, generic gray mat. On the wall where a collage of family photos used to hang, school pictures, awkward vacation smiles, our parents' wedding portrait, there was just a single large framed photo of Eleanor and Mom, taken recently. Mom looked tired, her smile thin and forced. Eleanor was beaming, her arm wrapped around Mom's shoulders in a way that looked less like an embrace and more like a claim of ownership. My heart hammered against my ribs. This wasn't my house anymore. It was a museum curated by my sister with every exhibit designed to tell her version of the story. I found her in the living room. She was sitting in Dad's old armchair, the worn leather one he'd always sat in to watch the news. She wasn't reading or watching TV. She was just sitting there, staring at the blank screen, a mug of something steaming on the end table beside her. She didn't look up when I walked in, but I saw her shoulders tense. She knew I was there. "Eleanor," I said, my voice sounding rougher than I intended. She took a slow, deliberate sip from her mug before turning her head to look at me. Her eyes, the same deep brown as our mother's, were completely flat. There was no sadness, no regret, not even surprise. Just a cold, hard fury that seemed to suck all the warmth from the room. "What do you want, Silas?" she asked, her voice low and tight. I took a breath, reminding myself to stay calm. I wasn't here for another fight. I was here for a solution. I came to talk about what's next, about the house. A humorless little smile touched her lips. "The house," she repeated as if the word tasted foul. "Of course. You couldn't even wait a full day, could you? The ink isn't even dry on your precious court order, and here you are circling." She finally turned in the chair to face me, fully, her gaze sweeping over me with contempt. Like a vulture. The word hit me like a physical blow. Vulture. I clenched my fists in my pockets, my fingernails digging into my palms. "That's not fair, and you know it. This isn't about me circling anything. This is about honoring Mom and Dad's actual wishes. The will they wrote together." "Don't you dare talk to me about their wishes," she hissed, her voice gaining a dangerous edge. "You weren't here. Where were you, Silas, for the last 2 years? You were off living your life, building your career, visiting for a few hours on a Sunday with a box of donuts like some distant cousin. I was here. I was the one changing her sheets. I was the one holding her hand when she was scared at night. I was the one who listened to the same stories over and over. I was the one who gave up my life for her. I wanted to be here more. I countered, my own voice rising despite my best efforts. You made it impossible. Every time I came, you hovered. You made things tense. You told Mom I was upsetting her. You cut my calls short. You made this house a fortress. I was protecting her, she shot back, slamming her mug down on the table. Tea sloshed over the rim. Protecting her from you. All you did was stress her out, asking questions, making her feel guilty. I was her caregiver. My only job was to keep her calm and safe. By manipulating her, by isolating her from her own son, by tricking a sick, grieving woman into signing away my birthright. The words tumbled out hotter and angrier than I'd planned. Eleanor laughed, a sound that was utterly devoid of warmth or humor. It was the sound of shattering glass. Tricking her. Oh, you really believe that, don't you? You and your disgusting little spy camera. She spat the words out. You put a camera in our mother's house. You spied on her. You spied on *me*. What kind of person does that? The kind of person who was worried his mother was being taken advantage of, I yelled, taking a step forward. The kind of person who was right. The court saw it, Eleanor. A judge and jury watched the footage from that hidden camera, and they saw exactly what you were doing. They saw what you wanted them to see, she screamed, finally getting to her feet. At 38, she looked older, worn down, but her anger gave her a terrifying energy. They saw clips. They didn't see the 17 hours a day I was here caring for her. They didn't see me cleaning up her messes or helping her to the bathroom or just sitting with her so she wasn't alone. You think you know what happened in this house because of a camera. You know nothing. You're a spy and a thief, and you used that footage to steal this house from me. It was breathtaking, the sheer, unadulterated audacity of her reality. In her mind, the abuse the footage proved was irrelevant. The crime wasn't her manipulation, it was my discovery of it. She had completely reframed the narrative to make herself the victim of my vigilance. I took a moment, forcing myself to breathe. Arguing about the past was pointless. She would never admit what she did. I had to focus on the future, on the legal reality we were now in. Okay, I said, holding up my hands in a gesture of peace. Okay, let's not relitigate the trial. It's over. The court decided. The house is legally ours. 50-50. You know what that means. She watched me, her eyes narrowed to slits. I know what it means. It means we're stuck, I said, trying to keep my tone practical, businesslike. Neither of us can do anything without the other's permission. The only logical thing to do, the only way for us to both move on, is to sell the house. We put it on the market, we split the proceeds right down the middle, 50-50, just like the will says, and we go our separate ways. It's the cleanest, fairest solution. I watched her face, hoping to see a flicker of reason, a glimmer of acceptance. Maybe the cold, hard logic of the finances would get through where emotion had failed. Instead, she started to laugh again. This time it was quieter, more chilling. Sell, she whispered, shaking her head. Sell my house. It's not your house, Eleanor. It's our house, I corrected gently. No, she said, her voice dropping to a deadly serious tone. It's mine. I earned this house. I paid for it with 2 years of my life. A piece of paper from some judge who wasn't here doesn't change that. This house is my payment for everything I did. It's all I have. I stared at her, a cold dread creeping up my spine. This wasn't just denial anymore. This was a complete break from our shared reality. Eleanor, you can't be serious. The court has ordered it. It's legally half mine. We have to sell. She took a step toward me, her face a mask of defiance. No, we don't. You want to sell. I don't. And since you need my permission, you're not getting it. I felt the floor drop out from under me. What are you saying? I'm saying I'm not going anywhere, she said, her voice ringing with finality. This is my home. I live here, and I will never, ever consent to a sale. You won. You got your name on the deed. Congratulations. But I have the house, and I'm not leaving. The air crackled with the tension of her ultimatum. It was a declaration of war. She was daring me. She knew the law. She knew that, without her consent, my 50% ownership was just a theoretical concept, a line item on a legal document with no real-world power. She was holding the physical asset, my inheritance, my memories hostage. You can't do that, I said, my voice barely a whisper. The court, the court can't make me sign a sales agreement, she sneered. So what are you going to do now, Silas? Are you going to get your little camera and spy on me some more? Are you going to try and force me out? Go ahead. She spread her arms wide, a gesture of absolute unyielding defiance. Try it. I dare you. I looked at her standing there in the living room where our mother had spent her last days, and I saw a stranger. The sister I grew up with, the one I'd built forts with in this very room, was gone. In her place was this hard, bitter woman who had twisted her sense of duty into a transaction and her grief into a weapon. My legal victory, the one that had cost me 6 months of my life and an emotional price I hadn't even begun to calculate, meant nothing. It was a key to a house I couldn't enter, a title to a property I couldn't control. She was using the very assets she tried to steal as her final line of defense, daring me to escalate, daring me to become the monster she already believed I was. I didn't say another word. There was nothing left to say. I turned around and walked out of the living room, down the hallway with its ghost of a family history, and out the front door, pulling it shut behind me. The click of the latch felt like a cell door locking. Standing back on the sidewalk, the cold January air felt clean fresh. The court order in my pocket now felt useless, flimsy. I had won the battle of the wills, the battle for the truth of my parents' legacy. But as I looked back at the house with my sister barricaded inside, I realized with a sickening certainty that the war was far from over. And the next battle would be even uglier. The first thing I did when I got back to my apartment was call my lawyer. My voice was flat, devoid of the anger and shock I felt roiling inside me. I just laid out the facts. Eleanor was refusing to cooperate. She was refusing to sell. She was, in effect, occupying a property that was 50% mine and daring me to do something about it. My lawyer sighed. It was the sound of a man who had seen this exact kind of family implosion 100 times before. He told me there was only one path forward, a legal mechanism I'd never heard of. It was called a petition for a partition sale. Essentially, when co-owners of a property can't agree on what to do with it, you can ask the court to step in and force a sale. The judge basically becomes the tiebreaker, ordering the property to be liquidated and the proceeds divided according to ownership. It was the legal system's final blunt instrument for breaking a stalemate. It felt extreme. It felt like dropping a bomb on our family history. But Eleanor had left me no other choice. She had drawn a line in the sand inside our parents' home, and I couldn't let her stand there alone. So I gave my lawyer the go-ahead. File it, I said. Let's get it over with. I had expected Eleanor to fight back through the courts. I had expected her to hire her own lawyer to file motions to drag things out. I was prepared for a legal battle. What I wasn't prepared for was the war she decided to wage on me personally. It started about a week later. My phone rang and it was my Aunt Carol, my mom's sister. Her tone wasn't warm or concerned. It was icy. She said, "Silas, I just had a long talk with Eleanor. I have to say, I'm just so disappointed in you." I was floored. "What are you talking about? Kicking your sister out of her home," she said, her voice dripping with judgment. "After everything she did for your mother, she sacrificed 2 years of her life, Silas. 2 years. And now you're trying to make her homeless, all for a little bit of money your parents would be ashamed." It was like a punch to the gut. I tried to explain. I tried to tell her about the court case, about the evidence, about the reason the judge invalidated the second will. But it was like talking to a brick wall. All she heard was Eleanor's story. In Eleanor's version, she was the martyr, the devoted daughter who had shouldered the entire burden of our mother's decline. The hidden cameras I'd installed weren't a desperate measure to protect our mother. They were a sinister tool I used to spy on her, to twist her moments of stress and exhaustion into something ugly so I could steal my rightful inheritance back. I was the villain, the cold, greedy brother who lived out of town and swooped in like a vulture after all the hard work was done. That phone call was just the first drop in a deluge. One by one, cousins, old family friends, people I'd known my entire life started calling. Or worse, they just stopped. My texts went unanswered. My calls went to voicemail. Eleanor had systematically gone through our entire extended family, painting me as a monster. She was brilliant at it, I had to admit. She played the victim perfectly, weeping on the phone, telling them how scared she was, how I was trying to throw her on the street. The legal process for the partition sale moved at a snail's pace, and Eleanor fought it every step of the way, Not in the courtroom, but on the front lawn. When the court-appointed appraiser came to assess the home's value, she refused to let him inside. He called me from his car parked across the street. "Mr. Cooper," he said, "your sister is, well, she's on the porch, and she's telling me that if I set foot on this property, she's calling the police for trespassing." I had to get my lawyer to file another motion just to grant the appraiser legal access. The same thing happened with the real estate agent the court assigned. Eleanor would stand in the doorway during showings, her arms crossed, glaring at potential buyers. She'd follow them from room to room, muttering about leaky pipes that didn't exist and a phantom mold problem in the basement. It was a campaign of sabotage designed to make the house unsellable and the process so miserable that I would just give up. There were nights during those months when I felt completely alone adrift in a sea of my family's disapproval. I'd lie awake, the words of my relatives echoing in my head. A spy. A vulture. She was under stress. What did you expect? I started to question myself. Was I the bad guy? Did I misunderstand? Was I so blinded by my own grief that I couldn't see her pain? And then I would force myself to remember. I would remember why I installed those nanny cams in the first place 18 months before our mother passed. It wasn't about the will. The new will didn't even exist yet. It was because during my weekend visits, I saw how Mom, who was 67 and frail with grief after Dad died, seemed to shrink whenever Eleanor entered the room. I heard the subtle, cutting remarks Eleanor would make, the way she dismissed Mom's confusion with a sharp, "Oh, for heaven's sake, Mother, we just talked about this." It was the little things, a pattern of emotional erosion that worried me sick. To keep my sanity, to remind myself that I wasn't crazy, I would watch the specific clip that had been the cornerstone of my legal case. It was from about a year before Mom died. She was sitting in her armchair in the living room looking out the window. Eleanor came in with a stack of papers and a pen. "Mom, you need to sign this," she said, her voice strained with a false sweetness that made my skin crawl. My mother, Mary, looked at the papers confused. "What is it, dear?" "It's just some estate planning stuff," Eleanor said quickly, flipping to the last page. "Lawyer says it's easier to get it done now. It makes sure the house is taken care of. For me, for all my hard work. But your father and I always wanted you and Silas to share." Mom said, her voice weak. "David always said," Eleanor's face hardened, "Dad's not here anymore, is he?" "I am. I'm the one here every single day. Silas is off living his life. I'm the one changing your sheets, making your meals, dealing with all of this. Don't you think I've earned it? Don't you think I deserve to have this one thing, my home, secure?" She pushed the pen into our mother's trembling hand. Mom looked from the paper to her daughter's face, and what I saw in her eyes on that recording broke my heart all over again. It was fear. She was afraid of disappointing the one person she now depended on for everything. She signed the paper. She signed away half of my father's legacy, half of her own promise, not out of choice but out of coercion. Watching that clip was like pouring fuel on a fire. It burned away all the doubt. This wasn't about money. It was about that look in my mother's eyes. I couldn't let that signature, that moment of fear and manipulation, be the final word on her life. I couldn't let Eleanor's lie become our family's truth. So I pushed forward. No matter how many relatives she turned against me, no matter how many appraisers she scared off, I was going to see this through to the end. After months of delays and sabotage, the court ordered us into a mandatory mediation session. The idea was to see if we could come to an agreement before the judge had to issue a final ruling on the partition sale. We sat at opposite ends of a long, polished table in a sterile conference room. A professional mediator, a calm, patient woman in her 50s, sat between us. For the first hour, Eleanor repeated the same performance she'd given our relatives. She cried. She spoke of her sacrifice, her exhaustion, her boundless love for our mother. She painted me as an absentee son who only showed up with lawyers and accusations. I stayed quiet, letting her talk. My lawyer had advised me to. We had the facts on our side. We didn't need the drama. Finally, the mediator leaned forward, her hands folded on the table. "Eleanor," she said, her voice gentle but firm, "I understand this has been incredibly painful for you, but the court has already made its ruling on the will. The house is legally owned 50-50. Your brother has proposed a simple, equitable solution. Sell the property, and you each take your half. It's a very standard, very fair proposal. Why won't you agree to it?" "Because it's my home," Eleanor shot back, her voice cracking. "I gave up my life for that house. I was there." "I understand that," the mediator said patiently, "but you would receive a significant amount of money from the sale. enough to buy a new home to start fresh. You wouldn't be left with nothing. So I have to ask again, what is the real reason you are refusing to sell? The mediator's calm, persistent questioning seemed to do what my anger never could. It cornered Eleanor. It stripped away her performance and left her with only the raw, unvarnished truth. The room was silent for a long moment. Eleanor just stared at the table, her jaw tight. When she finally looked up, the anger was gone. Her face was just crumpled, defeated. Because it was supposed to be my reward. She whispered the words so quiet I almost didn't hear them. The mediator tilted her head. Your reward for what? And then it all came pouring out. Not in a shout, but in a broken, rambling confession. For everything, Eleanor said, tears streaming down her face now. All my life it was always Silas. Silas got the praise. Silas was the smart one. Silas was the one Mom and Dad were always so proud of. I was just there, the responsible one, the one who stayed close to home. She looked at me, and for the first time I didn't see a villain. I saw my sister, a 38-year-old woman who still felt like a little girl living in her brother's shadow. When Dad died, she continued, her voice trembling, and Mom got sick. I thought, this is it. This is my chance to finally be the important one, to do something he could never do. I would be the perfect daughter. I would take care of her so well that she would finally see me, really see me. My stomach twisted. This wasn't about caregiving. It wasn't about duty. It was a transaction. I did everything, she sobbed, and it was so hard. She was so difficult sometimes, but I kept telling myself it was worth it, because in the end I would get the house. The house was the proof. It was the proof that I had won, that I was worth just as much as him. Getting her to sign that paper, it wasn't about cheating Silas. It was about collecting my payment. It was her finally telling me, you did a good job, Eleanor. You were the better child. The room was utterly silent except for her ragged breaths. Her confession hung in the air, sickening and absolute. She had admitted in front of a court official that she'd manipulated our dying mother to settle a decades-old childhood grudge. The mediator wrote something down on her notepad. Her face was unreadable, professional. Thank you for your honesty, Eleanor, she said, her tone neutral. However, by your own admission, you are refusing to cooperate with the legal co-owner of your property based on a personal feeling that you are owed more than the 50% the law entitles you to. In the eyes of the court, that is a refusal to mediate in good faith. Eleanor just stared at her, the reality of what she had just done slowly dawning on her. Her entire justification, the narrative of the martyred daughter that she had built around herself, had just been shattered by her own words. There was nothing left. No anger, no defiance. She just looked small and empty. I looked across the table at my sister and I felt absolutely no triumph. There was no "I told you so," no satisfaction. There was only a profound, bottomless sadness. The monster I had been fighting wasn't a monster at all. She was just a broken person, so consumed by a lifetime of perceived slights that she had destroyed our family and herself in a desperate attempt to feel valued. In fighting to honor my mother's true wishes, I had been forced to expose the ugliest parts of my sister's heart, and in doing so, I had severed the very last family tie I had left in the world. I had won, and I was completely and utterly alone. The fallout from the mediation was swift and decisive. With the mediator's report confirming Eleanor's unwillingness to cooperate, the judge granted the petition for a partition sale without delay. The house was put on the market, and this time there was nothing Eleanor could do to stop it. The defiance was gone, replaced by a hollow resignation. She allowed the realtor access. She wasn't present for the showings. Within a few weeks, we had a good offer from a young family, and the sale went through. I never spoke to Eleanor again. Our lawyers handled everything. The money from the sale was wired directly into our separate accounts, a clean 50-50 split, down to the penny. The legal and financial threads that had bound us together in this ugly mess were finally permanently cut. For a while, I didn't know what to do with the money. It felt tainted. It represented the loss of my parents, the destruction of my relationship with my sister, and the end of my family as I knew it. It sat in my bank account, a number on a screen that felt more like a scar than a victory. But my parents, David and Mary Cooper, hadn't worked their whole lives to own that house outright, just for it to become a symbol of pain. They intended it to be a foundation for their children's futures. And Eleanor's actions, her lies, couldn't be allowed to tarnish that legacy. The true victory wasn't the money in my bank account. It wasn't winning against my sister. The true victory was that the truth had prevailed. My mother's final years wouldn't be defined by a document she signed in fear. Her memory and my father's would be defined by their original intention, fairness, equality, and love for both of their children. A few weeks after the sale closed, I took a small portion of my inheritance and made a donation in my parents' names to a national elder abuse advocacy group. It was a small gesture, but it felt right. It felt like turning the pain of this whole ordeal into something that could protect another vulnerable parent, another family from going through what we did. I'm 35 years old. I have no siblings to speak of, and my extended family still sees me as the villain of this story. Maybe they always will. But as I move forward starting fresh, I am finally at peace. The war is over. I fought for the truth and I honored my parents. And in the quiet moments, I know with a certainty that settles deep in my bones that it was the right thing to do.